this most recent election shows that historic cycle, as the president-elect put it, has now ended. And we're beginning a new cycle, writing a new constitution with a left-wing government in power, and with a lot of hope and expectation that people's lives can be improved, that neoliberalism will be destroyed where it began in Chile, and that we'll be moving forward into a much brighter future.
The establishment in Colombia have never made it a fair fight for progressive politics in Colombia, but I think there was such a desire for change that Colombians were able to vote in Petro last Sunday. And I think it is massively hopeful for Colombia, for Latin America, and I think also for the UK.
To go from being in prison, wrongly accused of some terrible things, to be freed, to campaign again, and to win back the presidency was quite remarkable.
Et là maintenant, le continent est en train de se recomposer. Et donc, le chemin est
La France a joué un rôle positif dans tout ça.
En effet. Moi, je serais heureux qu'on puisse parler plus longuement.
The Peruvian government, the current Peruvian de facto government, is under siege from the region, and the United States seems to be the only one that is supporting it, but not very actively. So this will encourage the mass movement quite massively because they know they have friends in the rest of the continent. And my sense is that the progressive governments and the left-wing governments in the region are not going to tolerate that this is done, because it's completely unacceptable. If they get away with this, they might try somewhere else.
Thank you for coming on to talk about what's happened in Latin America in the past year. As you can see from that compilation, there's been a lot happening. Mostly great positive moves for the pink tide, which started in Chile, and we talked about Colombia and Brazil, and then obviously we saw Macron sucking up to the Venezuelan president, which seems quite unlikely if you look a few years ago. But at the end of the year, we've had this what's been described as a coup d'etat in Peru. So is this a pivotal moment in Latin America at this moment now, where it looks like a kind of fight back against the tide?
As you say, there have been some really important victories for the left in Latin America. People have been talking about a kind of second pink tide, this first pink tide that took place in the noughties, I guess, with the election of Chavez and Kirchner in Argentina and Lula in Brazil and Evo Morales. And obviously there was a fight back to that, and there were important victories in Latin America, in Peru, in Bolivia, really important. The coup was overturned in less than a year, and the left got back into power in late 2020. And I think it's just been 2 years since the left has been back in power. But I mean, the way it works in Latin America, and the way it works really anywhere, is that the right and the center, largely in many ways, will always fight back against the left's victories. They will never accept the democratic will of the people. They will never accept policies or governments that try and that are, if you want to use a Corbynista phrase, for the many, and they will always use whatever means at their disposal. And obviously they can count on the US government, which, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, will always help aid and abet the forces of reaction in Latin America. So yes, we've had what is a coup basically in Peru, and I know Francisco Dominguez was on your show recently talking about that. And there are sort of intricacies around the issue, and Castillo did make made a lot of mistakes, but essentially he was never allowed to govern by the elites in Lima, who rejected him as an outsider. And again, this is something we see in Latin America, that outsiders to the status quo, whether it be in Peru, in Bolivia, in Colombia, they're demonized by the ruling classes of these countries, obviously, who own the media and work with the media to do that. Again, something not too dissimilar to what happened here in the UK with Corbyn. So yes, I think there have been important victories. Obviously, the election of Lula, the re-election, however tight it was, and his assuming of the presidency on the 1st of January is an absolutely massive victory for the left in Brazil, regionally, and I think globally, because of the importance of Brazil as a regional player. I think the defeat of the coup in Bolivia and the ability of that government to resist the ongoing attempts to overthrow it has been, is to be applauded, and they deserve all our solidarity. In Argentina, the government is, probably not fulfilling the demands of many, but is working in a positive direction overall. In Chile, there has been an important defeat to this new constitution, presided by this new left of centre government, probably that has disappointed many people, perhaps by its timidity, and perhaps there are some lessons there for the left around how you react to this onslaught that will always come from the right, and as I said, aided and abetted by the centre. And in Mexico, a country that's not often talked about, there have been very important gains for progressive for the left under Manuel López Obrador. So I think overall, if we take the picture with all its successes and failures, I still think that we can be hopeful that the left in Latin America is making real gains, and I think certainly globally, if we look at regions where the left is on the front foot, on the ascendancy in many countries, I don't think we can find anywhere else that is as inspiring, perhaps, and as hopeful as Latin America.
Oh, and what lessons do you think we can draw from what's happened in the past year? I mean, we obviously, with Peru, you can see that Castillo did not mobilize people behind him. You spoke a little bit about something in Chile, and I've heard that in Argentina there's a kind of a way of undermining the government there. It's like, is a lesson that we've just got to be more observant about the tricks being used by the establishment and the neoliberal parties.
I think there are different lessons for different audiences. I think perhaps my critiques of, for example, a government in Chile by a young group, Gabriel Boric, the youngest president in the world, former student leader, who then became a politician, who has kind of always distanced himself from what he sees as a kind of older left, represented by people like Chavez, and he's certainly been very hostile to governments in Nicaragua and in Cuba. And so there's a new generation in Chile that, whilst saying that they pay homage to Allende. Let's remember that Chile next year will be 50 years since the US-backed coup in Chile that removed Allende from power. And so that young generation that are coming to power, I think are kind of, personally, I think have been naive in many ways. I think ideologically, perhaps, because of the dictatorship, also, to be fair to them, that literally physically eliminated a whole generation of left-wing activists in Chile. There isn't a kind of bridge to that old left in Chile, and so they almost feel that they're kind of reinventing the wheel when it comes to being a leftist in Latin America. And I think they've shown their naivety and lack of courage. I think courage is a very underexplored trait in politics, and courage is something that the masses will often respond to if they see that you fight for them, if you see that you fight against your enemy, if you see that you don't try and always placate and look for deals, which is, I think, increasingly what's happening in Chile, especially with regards to the new constitution. So I think that's a major lesson for the left around how to deal with your political enemies, and again, and not to be naive around the viciousness and the fact that the right and the center and the so-called center will invariably, historically, have proven to always side with the right when it comes to socialism or the right. The center will always generally pick the right. And so not to be too naive around how far they are prepared to go to undermine you, and how far they are willing to not play by the rules in order to get rid of you. One of the lessons of Latin America is, the mobilization, whether it be amongst independent media outlets, but mobilization is the key. Mobilization is what put people on the streets in April 2021 in Colombia, rejecting government austerity plans, which then sparked an uprising, which led to the first left-wing government since the Republic was formed in 1810, which is truly historic. And so the fact that Colombia has a left-wing government should give us massive hope. And so mobilization in Bolivia against the coup, that courage and mobilization is what we should learn from Latin America, the refusal to give up, even when things look very depressing and we get demoralized around, say, British politics, because there's a lot to be demoralized about. I think you have to carry on struggling, because if they can fight a coup in Bolivia, I think in the UK we can continue looking for a progressive future for UK politics. And just lastly, to say that I think the last really important thing that the Latin American left have been involved in, and it links back to the Assange issue, is calling for the release of Julian Assange. Recently, there's been a WikiLeaks delegation that's visited Brazil, met with President-elect Lula, met with the president of Argentina, met with the president of Bolivia, didn't meet with the president of Chile, curiously. So it would be interesting to see what's happened there. And again, that goes back to the discussion around the lack of courage and the lack of standing up for certain issues. Met with the new government in Colombia. The president of Mexico has been at the forefront of denouncing the continued incarceration and torture of Julian Assange by the UK authorities and US authorities. And so that's a really important initiative that the Latin American left has been at the forefront of